During lunch with my wife's family, I got a text from an unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you. I kept smiling, but I looked around the table, and something felt off. 174 missed calls. You know that feeling when you're at a family dinner and everyone's acting like they're auditioning for a Hallmark movie? Yeah, that was my Sunday afternoon. There I was, sitting at Margot and Stanley's ridiculously expensive dining table, the kind that probably cost more than my car, trying to pretend I gave a damn about Darren's latest CrossFit obsession while sawing through what had to be the world's toughest piece of ribeye. So Jason, how's work treating you? Stanley asked, flashing that politician smile he'd perfected during his 30-year career as a corporate lawyer. The guy could make nice weather sound like a hostile takeover bid. Can't complain, I replied, because honestly, what else do you say to your father-in-law when he asks questions like he's deposing a witness? I glanced over at Brielle, my wife of 8 years, who was giggling at something her mom had whispered. That laugh, the fake one she reserved for when she was nervous or trying too hard to seem normal. I'd heard it enough times to know the difference. Margot, bless her controlling heart, was in full hostess mode, practically floating around the table like some demented fairy godmother. More wine, Jason? You look like you could use it. There it was, that backhanded concern that made you feel like you were simultaneously being pampered and insulted. She had it down to an art form. I'm good, thanks. I took another bite of the steak, which was about as tender as my relationship with these people. Layla, Darren's wife, kept shooting me these weird looks like I had toilet paper stuck to my shoe or something. She was usually the normal one in this circus, but today she seemed jumpier than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. That's when my phone buzzed against my leg. Now, I'm not one of those people who checks their phone during dinner. Brielle had trained that habit out of me years ago with enough passive-aggressive comments to fill a self-help book. But something about the timing felt off. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but when you've been married into a family that treats Sunday dinner like a board meeting, you develop a sixth sense for when the other shoe's about to drop. I shifted slightly, keeping my face neutral as I glanced down at the screen under the table. Unknown number. No name. Just a message that made my blood run cold. Don't react. They're recording you. What the hell? I looked up slowly, trying to keep my expression as blank as a politician's promise. But suddenly, everything felt different. The lighting seemed harsher, the conversation sounded forced, and everyone's smiles looked like they'd been painted on with house paint. Margot was still beaming at me like I was her favorite son-in-law, but now her smile seemed stretched too tight, like plastic wrap over a bowl. Stanley was nodding along to whatever Darren was saying about protein shakes, but his eyes kept flicking toward me like he was waiting for something. And Brielle, my beautiful, neurotic, wine-loving wife, was drumming her fingers against her glass in that nervous rhythm she did when she was lying about something. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I'd heard that beat more times than I cared to count, usually right before she confessed to buying something expensive or forgetting to mention her mother was coming to visit. Earth to Jason, Darren said, and I realized everyone was looking at me. I asked if you wanted to hit the gym with me this week. You're looking a little soft around the edges. Ah yes, there was the Darren I knew and barely tolerated. My brother-in-law, the fitness instructor who thought everyone else's body was his personal improvement project. Normally, I'd fire back with some crack about his protein powder budget, but right now, all I could think about was that text message burning a hole in my pocket. Sure thing, I managed, cutting another piece of steak. Sounds great. The conversation drifted back to its usual topics, the weather, local politics, whose kid was doing what at which expensive private school. But I wasn't really listening anymore. I was watching. Margot kept glancing toward the living room like she was expecting someone. Stanley's phone was face down on the table, but I could see the edge of something, maybe an app, glowing through the case. Layla was barely touching her food, just pushing it around her plate like she was playing with evidence. And that's when it hit me. The feeling I'd been trying to ignore for months. The sense that conversation stopped when I walked into rooms. The way Brielle's family always seemed to know things about my schedule that I'd never told them. The strange questions about my work stress, my sleep patterns, my moods. They weren't just making small talk. They were gathering intel. My phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Check behind the family photos when you get home. Top shelf, living room. You're not paranoid. I almost laughed out loud. Almost. Because if there's one thing worse than finding out your family thinks you're losing your mind, it's finding out they might be right. But this felt different. This felt like someone was finally confirming what I'd been sensing for months. Jason, you okay? Brielle's voice cut through my thoughts. You look a little pale. Everyone was staring at me again. 6 pairs of eyes, all focused on my face like I was a science experiment that might explode at any moment. The concern in their voices sounded genuine enough, but there was something else underneath it. Something that felt like anticipation. Just tired, I said, forcing a smile. Long week at work, you know how it is. Of course, Margot said, reaching over to pat my hand. You work so hard, honey. Sometimes I worry you're pushing yourself too much. There it was again, that fake concern wrapped around what felt like an accusation. Like she was planting seeds for some future conversation about my mental health or work-life balance. I'd heard variations of this speech before, usually followed by suggestions about therapy or taking some time off. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and increasingly paranoid observations. By the time we finally said our goodbyes, complete with the usual round of air kisses and promises to do this again soon, I felt like I'd been through a psychological obstacle course. As we drove home, Brielle chattered about her mom's new diet and her dad's golf game, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was that text message and the feeling that my life had just shifted into a completely different gear. One thing was for sure, I was definitely checking behind those family photos when we got home. Because apparently, Sunday dinner just got a whole lot more interesting. You know what they say about curiosity and cats? Yeah, well, sometimes the cat gets more than it bargained for. That night, after Brielle had gone through her usual bedtime routine, face cream that cost more than most people's car payments, teeth brushing that sounded like she was scrubbing grout, and enough pillow fluffing to make a hotel housekeeper jealous, I finally had my chance to play detective. Night, babe. She mumbled into her pillow, already half asleep from the wine and whatever the hell Margot had been slipping into the conversation all evening. Within 10 minutes, she was snoring like a freight train with sinus problems. I waited another 20 minutes, just to be sure. Brielle was many things, beautiful, neurotic, possessive, but she was also a dead sleeper once she went down. A marching band could parade through our bedroom, and she'd just roll over and ask me to turn down the volume in her dreams. The living room felt different in the dark. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every creak of the hardwood floors sounded like a judgment. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and started where that mysterious text had suggested, behind the family photos on the top shelf. We had the usual collection of memories up there. Our wedding photo where Brielle looked like a princess and I looked like I was being held at gunpoint. Some vacation shots from that disastrous trip to Cabo, where it rained for 6 straight days, and a few family portraits where everyone was smiling just a little too hard to be natural. I reached behind the largest frame, the one of Brielle's whole family at last year's Christmas dinner. My fingers found something that definitely didn't belong. Something small, rectangular, and definitely not dusty enough to have been there long. Well, I'll be damned, I whispered, pulling out what looked like a tiny black rectangle with a lens. A camera. A freaking hidden camera, pointed right at our couch, where I spent most of my evenings watching Netflix and complaining about my day. My hands started shaking like I'd mainlined espresso. How long had this thing been there? What had it recorded? Did it have audio? Was someone watching me right now, getting their kicks out of my midnight snack runs and my habit of talking back to true crime documentaries? But that was just the beginning of my fun evening. I found 2 more cameras, one tucked behind a picture of Micah's Little League team, and another one nestled inside what I'd always thought was a decorative flower arrangement. Turns out, Margot's gift of silk roses was more high-tech than I'd given her credit for. Each camera was smaller than a matchbox, but sophisticated enough to make me wonder just how much this little surveillance operation had cost someone. These weren't Amazon specials. This was professional-grade spy stuff, the kind that probably required a manual thicker than a Stephen King novel. I gathered all 3 cameras and sat on the couch, the same couch that had apparently been starring in its own reality show without my knowledge. Part of me wanted to smash the damn things with a hammer, but I had enough sense left to realize I might need them as evidence. Evidence of what? Exactly, I wasn't sure yet, but my gut told me this was just the tip of the iceberg. That's when I remembered Brielle's office. Now, my wife had always been protective of her workspace. She claimed she needed absolute privacy for her freelance marketing consultations, which basically meant she spent 3 hours a day on Zoom calls telling small businesses how to make their Instagram posts more engaging. The door was always locked, and she guarded that key like it contained nuclear launch codes. But tonight, privacy was a luxury I couldn't afford. Good thing I'd learned how to pick locks back in college, a skill that had impressed exactly 0 women, but was apparently going to save my sanity tonight. After 5 minutes of delicate maneuvering with a paperclip and a bobby pin I'd stolen from Brielle's vanity, I heard that sweet click of victory. Her office was exactly what you'd expect from someone whose biggest life decision was choosing between oat milk and almond milk for her morning latte. Motivational posters about living your best life, enough succulents to start a greenhouse, and a desk that looked like it had been organized by someone with serious control issues. But her computer, that was where things got interesting. I fired up her laptop, grateful that she'd never been paranoid enough to change her password from our anniversary date. The desktop looked normal enough, but I started digging through folders like a man possessed, and that's when I found it, buried 3 folders deep in a directory labeled Work Projects 2024. A folder named Clips_JW. JW. Jason Williams. My initials. My heart started doing this weird stuttering thing like it couldn't decide whether to stop beating or explode. Inside that folder were dozens of video files, all with timestamps from the past 3 months. The file names read like a psychological profile written by someone with a serious grudge and too much time on their hands. Kitchen_argument_JW_092724.mp4. I remembered that day. I'd been pissed about the electric bill. Garage_phone_call_JW_100324.mp4. The day I'd called my buddy Mike to complain about Brielle's family. Mood_change_JW101524.mp4. This one was just me rubbing my eyes after a long day at work, but the title made it sound like I was having some kind of breakdown. There were dozens more, each one cataloged like evidence in a criminal case. Someone had been watching me, recording me, and apparently building some kind of narrative about my mental state and behavior patterns. The timestamps showed they'd been at this for months, maybe longer. I started copying everything to a flash drive I found in her desk drawer. While the files transferred, I clicked on one of the videos, the one labeled Mood_change. It was just me, sitting at our kitchen table, looking tired and rubbing my temples. Nothing dramatic, nothing crazy, just a guy dealing with a headache after a long day. But watching it felt like seeing myself through a funhouse mirror. Someone had taken a completely normal moment and labeled it like it was evidence of instability. Like they were building a case against me, one mundane moment at a time. The file transfer finished, and I closed everything down, making sure to clear the browser history and delete any trace that I'd been there. As I locked the office door behind me and crept back to our bedroom, one thought kept running through my head on repeat. This wasn't just surveillance. This was preparation. The question was, preparation for what? I slipped back into bed next to Brielle, who was still snoring like a buzz saw with rhythm problems. She looked peaceful, innocent even, her face relaxed in sleep. But now I couldn't help wondering. Was she just a pawn in whatever game her family was playing, or was she the one calling the shots? Either way, I had the flash drive hidden in my sock drawer, and tomorrow I was going to figure out exactly what kind of mess I'd stumbled into. Because one thing was for damn sure, I wasn't going to be anyone's unwitting reality show star anymore. Tuesday afternoon pickup at Lincoln Elementary was usually the highlight of my day. You know, that moment when you see your kid's face light up because dad showed up instead of getting stuck on another conference call about quarterly projections that nobody really cares about. But today, something felt off the second Micah climbed into the back seat. My 8-year-old son was usually a chatterbox, the kind of kid who could turn a 5-minute car ride into a documentary about everything from why dogs can't eat chocolate to his theory that his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, might actually be a robot. But today he was quieter than a church mouse with laryngitis. "Hey, buddy," I said, adjusting the rearview mirror to get a better look at him. "How was school? Did Tommy bring those Pokemon cards he was bragging about?" "It was okay," he mumbled, staring out the window like the suburban landscape of our neighborhood contained the secrets of the universe. That was it. No elaborate story about recess drama or complaints about cafeteria pizza. Just okay. Red flag number 1. We were about halfway home when I noticed him fidgeting with his backpack. Not the usual kid fidgeting. This was nervous energy, like he was carrying something he wasn't supposed to have. Maybe contraband candy from his buddy's lunch trade, or one of those stupid slime toys that every parent pretends to hate, but secretly thinks are pretty cool. "What's in the bag, kiddo?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "New homework assignment? Please tell me Mrs. Patterson isn't making you build another volcano. I'm still finding baking soda in weird places from the last one." That got a tiny smile, but he quickly looked away. "Just stuff." Red flag number 2. When we got home, Micah disappeared upstairs faster than a politician's promise during election season. I could hear him in his room, moving around like he was either cleaning or hiding something. Since my son's idea of cleaning usually involved shoving everything under his bed and calling it a day, I was betting on hiding. I gave him 20 minutes before I knocked on his door. "Hey, Micah, you hungry? I was thinking about making those grilled cheese sandwiches you like. The ones with the fancy cheese that costs more than my college textbooks used to." "Not hungry," came the muffled reply. Now I was officially worried. Micah turning down grilled cheese was like me turning down a cold beer after dealing with Brielle's family. It just didn't happen in the natural order of things. I pushed the door open gently. He was sitting on his bed, backpack beside him, looking like he was wrestling with the kind of problems that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old's world. His sandy hair was sticking up in that way it did when he'd been running his hands through it, and his usually bright eyes looked tired. "Micah, what's going on? You're acting like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, and last I checked, that was supposed to be my job." He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, the ones he'd inherited from Brielle, and I could see he was struggling with something. Finally, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Someone put this in my backpack," he said quietly, handing it to me like it might explode. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be as I unfolded the paper. The message was typed, not handwritten, in a font that looked like it came from every generic computer in America. "Be careful. They're using your boy." The air in the room suddenly felt thicker than peanut butter. I stared at the note, reading it 3 times before the words really sank in. Someone, the same someone who'd been texting me warnings and apparently knew about the cameras in my house, had gotten close enough to my son to slip him a message. "Micah," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. "When did you find this?" "During lunch," he said. "It was just there, in my backpack when I went to get my sandwich." He looked scared now, and that made something primal and protective flare up in my chest like a wildfire. "Dad, what does it mean? Who's using me? For what?" I sat down on his bed and pulled him close, trying to figure out how to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. "How do you tell your kid that his grandparents might be playing some kind of twisted game that involves him as a pawn?" "I'm not sure yet, buddy," I said honestly. "But I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth, okay? Have Grandma Margot or Grandpa Stanley said anything weird to you lately? Maybe asked you questions about me or Mom?" Micah shifted uncomfortably, and I could practically see the internal battle playing out on his face. Kid loyalty versus truth-telling. It's one of those impossible positions children shouldn't have to navigate. "Well," he said slowly, "Grandma did say something kind of strange last weekend when Mom took me over there for lunch." My heart started doing that stuttering thing again. "What did she say?" "She asked me if you ever got really angry at home. Like, scary angry." He looked up at me with worry written all over his face. "I told her no, because you don't. But then she said if you ever did anything that made me feel unsafe, I should tell her right away." The rage that shot through me was white-hot and immediate. They were coaching my son, planting seeds, setting him up to be their star witness in whatever sick production they were planning. "What else did she say, Micah?" He was quiet for a long moment, then looked away. "She said if you and Mom if you guys ever got divorced, she'd make sure I got to stay with her and Grandpa. That I wouldn't have to live with you if I didn't want to." And there it was. The end game. They weren't just trying to make me look unstable. They were positioning themselves to take custody of my son. Margot and Stanley, with their perfect house and their perfect reputation and their apparently unlimited capacity for manipulation, were planning to steal my kid. "Dad," Micah's voice was small, "are you and Mom getting divorced?" I pulled him closer, breathing in that kid smell of playground dirt and grape juice. "I don't know, buddy, but I want you to know something, okay? No matter what happens, No matter what anyone tells you, I will never stop fighting to be your dad. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and nothing, absolutely nothing, is going to change that. That evening, after Micah was asleep and Brielle was in the shower, I sat in my car in our driveway and made the most important phone call of my life. I'd gotten the number from a colleague whose messy divorce had taught him more about family law than anyone should have to know. Rowe Family Law, this is Giselle Rowe. Ms. Rowe, my name is Jason Williams, and I think my in-laws are trying to steal my son. There was a pause, then, Mr. Williams, how soon can you get to my office? And bring whatever evidence you have. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from a woman who looked like she could stare down a tornado and ask it to please keep the noise down. Giselle Rowe was exactly what I needed. Sharp, no nonsense, and apparently unimpressed by wealthy in-laws who thought they could buy their way to whatever they wanted. She watched the videos I'd copied from Brielle's computer, read the note that had been slipped to Micah, and listened to my story without once looking like she thought I was crazy. Mr. Williams, she said finally, you're not paranoid. You're under attack, and we're going to shut this down before it goes any further. Within 72 hours, we had a no-contact order. Margot and Stanley were legally prohibited from being alone with Micah, from contacting him at school, and from discussing custody arrangements with him. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But I should have known they wouldn't go down without a fight. You know what they say about poking a sleeping bear? Well, turns out when you serve a no-contact order to a control freak like Margot, you don't just wake the bear, you give it a law degree and a serious grudge. I should have seen the retaliation coming, but honestly, I thought even they had some limits. Shows what I know about underestimating people who think Sunday dinners are strategic planning sessions. It was Thursday morning, and I was running late for work because Micah had decided that today was the perfect day to have an existential crisis about whether his socks matched. You know how kids are. They'll wear the same Superman shirt for 3 days straight, but suddenly become fashion critics when you're trying to get out the door. Dad, this sock is definitely more blue than this one, he announced, holding up 2 socks that looked identical to my colorblind eyes. Buddy, they're both navy blue. From the same package. That I bought yesterday, I said, grabbing my keys and trying not to think about how this was the kind of normal parenting moment that Margot and Stanley were trying to steal from me. We finally made it out to the driveway, where my trusty Honda Civic was waiting. Nothing fancy, but it got me to work and back without requiring a second mortgage. At least, it usually did. Today, my car looked like it had been the canvas for some seriously disturbed street art. Coward was spray-painted across the driver's side door in white letters that looked like they'd been applied by someone having a seizure. Freak decorated the hood in the same shaky handwriting. And on the back windshield, in letters big enough to be seen from space, unfit dad. Dad, Micah's voice was small behind me. Why did someone write mean things on our car? I turned around, and my heart broke into about 17 different pieces. My kid was standing there with his backpack hanging off one shoulder, his perfectly matched navy socks peeking out of his sneakers, staring at his dad's vandalized car like it was evidence that maybe the mean things were true. This was exactly what they wanted. They wanted Micah to see me as a target, as someone who attracted trouble and drama. They wanted him scared and confused and looking for stability. Stability that Grandma and Grandpa would be happy to provide. You know what, kiddo? I said, kneeling down to his level. Sometimes when people are hurting inside, they do mean things to try to make other people hurt too. It doesn't make it okay, but it means they're the ones with the problem, not us. But what if they're right? He whispered. What if you are a bad dad? And there it was, the poison they'd been dripping into his 8-year-old brain, finally bubbling to the surface. I pulled him into a hug that probably lasted longer than was socially acceptable for a Thursday morning in suburbia. Micah, look at me, I said, holding his face in my hands. The only person who gets to decide if I'm a good dad is you. Do I make you feel safe? He nodded. Do I help you with your homework and make you brush your teeth even when you don't want to? Another nod, this one with a tiny smile. Do I love you more than anything else in the whole world? Yeah, he said, and the smile got bigger. Then I'm exactly the dad I'm supposed to be. Some grown-ups are just really bad at handling their feelings, and they take it out on people like us. But we're tougher than some spray paint, aren't we? I called my boss and told him I'd be late due to a family emergency involving vandalism, which sounds way more dramatic than it actually was, but got me the morning off without questions. After dropping Micah at school with extra hugs and reassurances, I came back home to document the damage. Good thing I'd had the foresight to install a security camera above our garage 2 days earlier. Call it paranoia, call it preparation, but something had told me that serving legal papers to people who thought surveillance was a family hobby might result in some pushback. That night, after Micah was asleep and Brielle was doing her nightly skincare routine that probably involved more chemicals than a science lab, I sat down with my laptop to review the footage. I fast-forwarded through hours of nothing, just our quiet suburban street doing its quiet suburban thing. Then, at 2:47 a.m., a figure appeared in the frame. Someone in a dark hoodie, moving with the kind of purpose that screamed, "I'm definitely up to no good." They had a can of spray paint in one hand and what looked like a piece of paper in the other, probably using it as a stencil to make sure their hateful message was legible. The figure worked quickly, efficiently, like they'd planned this out. No hesitation, no looking around nervously. This wasn't some random act of teenage rebellion or a case of mistaken identity. This was personal, calculated, and mean as hell. But here's the thing about security cameras. They see everything, even when you think you're being clever. As the vandal finished their artistic masterpiece and started to walk away, they pulled back their hood for just a second to check their work. And there she was, clear as day under the streetlight. Margot, my own mother-in-law, dressed like some kind of suburban ninja, spray painting hate speech on my car while my family slept inside. The woman who'd spent 8 years telling everyone what a wonderful addition to the family I was, who'd given speeches at our wedding about love and acceptance, had just committed a crime to try to make me look unstable. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I saved the footage to 3 different drives and emailed copies to Giselle Rowe before I even had my morning coffee. By 9 a.m., she was on the phone with the court clerk. By noon, the footage was part of our official case file. But the vandalism was just the opening act in what was turning out to be a full-scale assault on my sanity. Brielle started acting stranger by the day, asking questions that felt more like interrogations than conversations. "How was your therapy session this week?" she'd ask over dinner, even though I wasn't in therapy. "Did you remember to take your medication?" she'd say in front of Micah, even though the only medication I took was the occasional Advil for headaches. "You seem really stressed lately. Maybe you should talk to someone," she'd suggest, usually right after I'd expressed any normal human emotion like frustration or tiredness. It was like she was reading from a script titled, "How to Make Your Husband Sound Crazy in Front of Your Kid." Every conversation felt like a trap, every question felt loaded, and every day I could see her getting more nervous. Not about what her family was doing to me, but about what I might do back. The worst part was watching her struggle with it. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes with this expression that was half fear, half guilt, like she knew exactly what was happening but couldn't figure out how to stop it. Or maybe didn't want to stop it. At this point, I honestly couldn't tell the difference. One night, after she'd spent dinner asking me about my anger management in front of Micah for the 3rd time that week, I cornered her in our bedroom. "Brielle, what the hell is going on? Why are you talking to me like I'm a ticking time bomb?" She looked away, fidgeting with her wedding ring the way she did when she was about to lie about something. "I'm just worried about you. You've been so intense lately." "Intense? My car got vandalized by your mother. Your family's been spying on me for months, and they're trying to convince our son that I'm dangerous." "Yeah, I'm a little intense. But that doesn't make me crazy. Maybe if you just, I don't know, apologize to my parents? Tried to work things out." And there it was. She wanted me to roll over, to pretend the cameras and the manipulation and the spray paint were all just a big misunderstanding. She wanted me to go back to being the convenient son-in-law who smiled and nodded and let her family treat him like a supporting character in their own personal drama. But here's the thing about fighting for your kid. Once you start, you can't stop. Not when you're right. Not when they're wrong. And definitely not when they're stupid enough to commit crimes on camera. The war was just getting started at F. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, I was about to serve up a 5-course meal that had been chilling in my mental refrigerator for weeks. Sometimes the best way to deal with people who think they're playing chess while you're playing checkers is to flip the whole damn board and show them you've been playing poker this entire time. The plan came to me on a Tuesday night while I was helping Micah with his math homework and listening to Brielle on the phone with her mother, discussing Jason's recent behavior patterns like I was some kind of lab experiment. That's when it hit me. If they wanted to study me, document me, and analyze me, then by God, I was going to give them something worth analyzing. Honey, I said to Brielle after she hung up, using that sweet voice I reserved for when I was about to suggest something that sounded reasonable but was actually completely insane. I've been thinking. Maybe you're right about trying to work things out with your family. The look of relief that washed over her face was almost enough to make me feel guilty. Almost. But then I remembered the spray paint and the cameras and my 8-year-old asking if I was a bad dad, and the guilt evaporated faster than beer at a college party. Really? She said, like I'd just told her I'd found the cure for cancer in our garage. You mean it? Absolutely. In fact, why don't we invite everyone over for dinner this weekend? My treat. I'll cook. I'll clean. I'll even break out the good wine. I paused for effect. It's your dad's birthday next week, right? We could make it a celebration. Brielle practically bounced off the couch. Oh my God, Jason, yes. Mom will be so excited. And Dad's been feeling really bad about the whole misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Right. Because secretly recording your son-in-law and trying to manipulate your grandson is just a simple case of miscommunication. But I smiled and nodded like the supportive husband I was pretending to be. Great. Let's do Saturday night. Tell them 7 o'clock, and that I'm planning something special. Oh, I was planning something special, all right. The next 3 days were a masterclass in preparation. I called my buddy Jonah, who ran a small tech company and owed me a favor from when I'd helped him move his entire office setup during his divorce. Jonah was the kind of guy who could make your toaster smart if you gave him enough time and coffee. So let me get this straight. Jonah said when I explained what I needed. You want me to rig your dining room with a wireless projector system and hidden speakers, all controlled by your phone, so you can surprise your in-laws during dinner? That's exactly what I want. Think you can do it without them noticing? Brother, I once installed a whole home theater system while my ex-wife was at her book club. This is child's play. But are you sure about this? Because once you press that button, there's no going back. Jonah, they've been recording me for months. Turnabout is fair play. Saturday arrived with all the fanfare of a funeral march. I spent the day cooking like my life depended on it. Herb-crusted lamb, roasted vegetables, homemade bread, chocolate mousse that took 3 hours to set properly. If this was going to be my last supper with Brielle's family, I was going to make it memorable for all the right reasons before I made it memorable for all the wrong ones. Micah helped me set the table, chattering about his upcoming school project on volcanoes. He had no idea that his dad was about to create an explosion that would make Mount Vesuvius look like a party popper. Brielle fluttered around the house like a nervous butterfly, changing outfits 3 times and checking her makeup every 5 minutes. You seem really calm, she said, studying my face like she was looking for cracks in my facade. Are you sure you're okay with this? Never been better, I said, and I meant it. There's something liberating about finally having a plan, especially when that plan involves publicly humiliating people who've spent months trying to humiliate you in private. They arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, because punctuality was apparently the one virtue the whole family actually shared. Margot swept in wearing enough jewelry to set off a metal detector. Stanley followed in his standard-issue patriarch uniform of khakis and a polo shirt, and Darren and Layla brought up the rear looking like they'd rather be literally anywhere else on earth. Jason, Margot exclaimed, air-kissing me like we were old friends instead of mortal enemies. The house smells divine. You've really outdone yourself. Well, you know me, I said, accepting her fake hug with a smile that probably looked more predatory than friendly. I like to go all out for special occasions. Dinner conversation flowed like molasses mixed with arsenic. Stanley regaled us with stories from his golf game. Darren talked about his latest CrossFit achievements, and Margot kept making pointed comments about how relaxed and normal I seemed tonight. If only they knew what was coming. The food was actually fantastic, which was annoying because I'd been hoping they'd be too suspicious to eat much. But they cleaned their plates like they hadn't seen food in weeks, probably because they were so relieved that I wasn't acting unstable for once. We were just finishing the chocolate mousse when I decided it was showtime. Before we have coffee, I said, standing up and pulling out my phone. I thought it might be nice to share some family memories. You know, really celebrate how close we've all become over the years. Oh, that sounds lovely, Margot said, clasping her hands together like she was about to witness a miracle. I've put together a little video presentation. I continued, tapping the app Jonah had programmed for me. Something I think you'll all find very illuminating. The lights dimmed automatically. God bless Jonah and his attention to detail. And the projector screen descended from the ceiling like the curtain at a Broadway show. Except this wasn't going to be Cats or Hamilton. This was going to be more like a documentary about the worst people in America. The first video started playing. Brielle, crystal clear on our big screen, sitting in what looked like Margot's kitchen, saying, "I swear, Mom, sometimes I think he's like a ticking time bomb. You never know what's going to set him off." The room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop in the next county. The second clip rolled, Margot's voice, whispering to Stanley in their living room. "Just a few more staged videos, and he'll crack completely. Then we'll have everything we need for the custody hearing." Stanley tried to interrupt, but the third video was already playing. Him, clear as day, saying, "Once we get full custody of Micah, we can start looking for someone better for Brielle. Someone more manageable." Darren bolted for the wall, probably trying to find the power switch, but Jonah had hardwired everything into a separate circuit. No getting out of this screening, folks. The final clip was my personal favorite. Margot, in full color HD, spray painting my car at 2:47 in the morning like some kind of geriatric street artist with anger management issues. When the lights came back up, you could have heard a cricket sneeze. 6 faces stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to horror to what I could only describe as, "Oh shit, we've been caught." I looked around the table, savoring the moment like a fine wine. "So," I said, settling back into my chair, "this is what family looks like to you?" The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Stanley finally found his voice. "Jason, you have to understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "I understand that you've been recording me for months. I understand that you've been coaching my son to betray me. I understand that you think I'm so stupid that I wouldn't figure out your little game." Margot's face had gone white as fresh snow. We were concerned about. About what? About the fact that I wasn't convenient enough for your daughter? About the fact that I actually have opinions and boundaries? I stood up again, feeling 8 feet tall and bulletproof. "Well, congratulations. You wanted to see what I'm really capable of when I'm backed into a corner. Consider this your front row seat." The evening ended with a lot of slamming doors, screeching tires, and threats about lawyers that would probably keep the legal system busy for months. But you know what? It was worth every second. You know that feeling when you wake up thinking you're having a nightmare, but then you realize Brielle hogging the covers, the alarm clock mocking me with its cheerful beeping, maybe a cat sleeping on my face if we actually owned a cat. Instead, I found a photograph, right there on my pillow, next to my head, like some demented tooth fairy had decided to trade nightmares for molars. The photo was of me, sleeping in this exact spot, probably taken from the foot of our bed based on the angle. I looked peaceful, innocent even, which was ironic considering I was apparently starring in someone's unauthorized documentary about how to terrorize your son-in-law. I sat up so fast I probably gave myself whiplash, clutching the photo like it might bite me. My heart was doing that thing where it tries to escape through your throat, and I could feel sweat breaking out in places I didn't know could sweat. On the back, in that same generic computer font that was becoming the signature of my personal stalker, was a message that made my blood turn to ice water. "You still don't know what we're capable of." Well, that was ominous as hell. I looked around our bedroom like I was seeing it for the first time. Someone had been in here. While I was sleeping. While Brielle was sleeping right next to me. They'd gotten close enough to take a crystal clear photo and leave me a little love note. All without either of us noticing a damn thing. That's when the real panic set in. Not the, "oh no, I'm late for work," kind of panic, but the primal, lizard brain panic that makes you want to grab your kid and run for the hills. Someone had violated the one place in the world where I was supposed to feel safe, and they'd done it so easily, it was like they had a key to our front door. "Brielle." I shook her shoulder, probably harder than I should have, but subtle wasn't really an option at this point. She mumbled something about 5 more minutes and coffee, the way she did every morning when consciousness was still optional. "Brielle, wake up. Now." Someone was in our house. That got her attention. She sat up, hair looking like she'd been electrocuted, squinting at me like I was speaking ancient Greek. "What are you talking about? What time is it?" I showed her the photo. Watching her face change from sleepy confusion to wide-eyed terror was like watching someone realize they're in a horror movie and they're definitely not the final girl. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at the image. "When, how did? Jason, what the hell is happening?" Good question. I wish I had a good answer. The next 3 hours were like something out of a police procedural, except instead of cool, competent detectives, I was the panicked amateur playing hide-and-seek with invisible enemies. I searched every inch of our house like a man possessed, checking every room, every closet, every corner where someone might hide a camera or a listening device. I found them in places that made no sense. A tiny camera inside the smoke detector in our hallway. The same hallway Micah walked down every morning on his way to brush his teeth. Another one tucked inside what I'd always thought was a broken outlet in our living room. And the crown jewel, a sophisticated recording device hidden inside the vent above our bed, positioned perfectly to capture both audio and video of our most private moments. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the devices as I collected them. Each one was smaller than a thumb drive, but probably cost more than my monthly car payment. This wasn't some amateur hour operation with equipment from Amazon. This was professional-grade surveillance gear, the kind that required serious money and serious connections to obtain. I called Giselle Rowe from my car, parked in the driveway because I didn't trust my own house anymore. My voice was probably an octave higher than normal, but I didn't care about sounding tough at this point. I just wanted answers. They were in my bedroom, Giselle, while we were sleeping. They took a photo of me and left it on my pillow like some kind of sick calling card. "Mr. Williams, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, and her voice had that calm, professional tone that lawyers use when they're about to tell you something that will ruin your entire week. "Don't touch anything else in that house. Don't clean anything. Don't move anything. I'm calling the police right now, and they're going to treat this as a crime scene." Crime scene. My house. The place where Micah took his baths and did his homework and watched cartoons on Saturday mornings was now a crime scene. The police arrived 40 minutes later. Two detectives who looked like they'd rather be investigating literally anything else, and a tech specialist who seemed genuinely interested in the equipment I'd found. Detective Morrison was about my age with tired eyes and the kind of mustache that suggested he'd been a cop since the 1980s. Detective Park was younger, sharper, and had the look of someone who actually enjoyed solving puzzles. "So let me get this straight," Detective Morrison said, flipping through his notebook like he was reading a grocery list instead of documenting a home invasion. "Your in-laws have been surveilling you for months. You exposed them at a dinner party, and now someone's escalating to breaking and entering." "That's the short version, yeah," I said. "The long version involves custody battles and spray-painted cars and enough family drama to fill a soap opera." Detective Park was more interested in the technical aspects. She examined each camera with the kind of focus I usually reserve for watching football playoffs. "These are expensive," she said finally. "Military grade, some of them. The kind of equipment that requires licenses to purchase. We're not dealing with amateurs here." She ran the serial numbers through some kind of database while I tried not to think about how many private moments had been recorded and stored somewhere for people to analyze. The results came back an hour later, and Detective Park's expression told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. "The equipment was purchased through a shell company," she said. "But we traced the payments back to a firm called Strategic Solutions, LLC. It's a private investigation company that specializes in, let's call it family dispute resolution." "What does that mean in English?" I asked. "It means your in-laws hired professional stalkers," Detective Morrison said bluntly. "The kind of people who make a living digging up dirt on cheating spouses and documenting custody violations." But the real breakthrough came when they traced the signal from the camera above our bed. It wasn't just recording, it was transmitting. Live streaming our most private moments to a receiver somewhere in the city. The trail led to a small apartment downtown, rented under the name Elena Marsh. I'd never heard of her, but according to the rental agreement, she'd been paying for the place with checks from a law firm that had connections to Stanley's company. "Elena Marsh," Detective Park said, showing me the lease documents. "Ring any bells?" It didn't, but something about the name felt familiar, like a word on the tip of your tongue that you can't quite remember. We were about to find out that Elena Marsh was just the beginning of a much bigger, much darker story. "Mr. Williams," Detective Morrison said as they prepared to leave, I want you to understand something. This level of surveillance, this kind of coordination, this isn't just family drama anymore. Someone's running a professional operation designed to destroy your life, and they're willing to commit serious felonies to do it. As I watched the police drive away, taking boxes of evidence that used to be hidden in my walls, I realized that the photo on my pillow wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. And apparently, I'd been fighting a battle while they'd been planning a full-scale invasion. You know how they say curiosity killed the cat? Well, apparently it also makes you really good at internet detective work when your life is falling apart and you've got nothing left to lose. After the police left with their boxes of evidence and their promises to investigate thoroughly, I did what any rational person would do. I became a one-man FBI unit operating out of my kitchen table. Elena Marsh. The name kept rolling around in my head like a marble in a tin can, making noise but not settling anywhere useful. I Googled everything from Elena Marsh private investigator to Elena Marsh psychopath, but came up empty except for a few generic LinkedIn profiles and someone's Pinterest board full of casserole recipes. That's when I decided to get creative with my search terms. If Elena Marsh was a fake name, and let's face it, what kind of professional stalker uses their real identity? Maybe I could work backwards from what I knew. The apartment lease, the law firm connections, the fact that someone had enough money to rent spy equipment that probably cost more than my annual salary. 3 hours and 6 cups of coffee later, I hit pay dirt. Buried in the archives of a local newspaper from 2 years ago was a small article about a failed lawsuit. The plaintiff's name was Talia Winslow, and she was suing her ex-boyfriend for emotional distress and financial manipulation. The case was thrown out of court, but here's where it got interesting. Her lawyer was from the same firm that had connections to Stanley's company, Talia Winslow. Now that name rang a bell like a fire alarm in my brain. I dug deeper, and there she was, Brielle's college roommate from their senior year. I remembered her from old photos, blonde, petite, with the kind of smile that probably looked innocent in person but came across as slightly unhinged in pictures. Brielle had mentioned her a few times over the years, usually in the context of "thank God we're not friends anymore" conversations. But according to my research, Talia had some serious baggage. After college, she dated Stanley's nephew for 3 years before their engagement fell apart in what looked like a spectacular mess of accusations and restraining orders. She'd disappeared after the failed lawsuit, and everyone assumed she'd moved on with her life like a normal person would. Apparently, moving on wasn't really her thing. The property records told the rest of the story. 6 months ago, while I was obliviously living my life and thinking my biggest problems were Micah's homework habits and Brielle's wine budget, Elena Marsh, aka Talia Winslow, had somehow managed to get Brielle to sign papers transferring partial ownership of our house to her. Our house, the place where I'd been paying the mortgage for 8 years, where Micah had taken his first steps, where I'd installed a swing set and painted a bedroom and built a life that someone was now trying to steal with forged documents and legal loopholes. I called Giselle so fast I probably broke some kind of speed dialing record. "They're trying to steal my house," I said without preamble. Brielle signed papers she probably didn't understand, and now some psycho ex-roommate with multiple identities thinks she owns part of my property. Giselle's response was immediate and professional. "We're filing fraud complaints and halting any property transfers first thing tomorrow morning." This adds several more felonies to our case. By the end of the week, I had temporary injunctions protecting the house, restraining orders against 3 different people, and enough legal documentation to start my own law library. Talia/Elena's network was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater, but I had this sinking feeling that we were still only scratching the surface. The question that kept me awake at night wasn't who was behind all this. It was why. What had I done to deserve this level of coordinated psychological warfare? Was I really such a threat to their perfect family dynamic that they'd hired professional help to destroy me? Or was there something bigger going on that I still didn't understand? Turns out, I was about to find out the hard way. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, sometimes it's also best served in front of 200 people at a professional conference where your enemies think they're the experts. Stanley and Brielle had signed up to speak at some fancy parenting symposium downtown, probably months before they realized their favorite hobby of psychological warfare was about to bite them in their perfectly manicured asses. The event was called Modern Co-Parenting, navigating emotional stability in divided families, which was ironic enough to make me laugh out loud when I saw the flyer. These people had turned family dysfunction into performance art, and now they were going to teach other people how to do it better. I bought a ticket under a fake name. Two could play the false identity game, and spent the morning of the event preparing what I liked to call my presentation materials. Giselle had given me copies of everything we'd submitted to the court, the surveillance footage, the audio recordings, the property fraud documents, even the spray paint security camera footage that showed Margot's late-night artistic endeavors. The conference was held at the Marriott downtown, in one of those generic ballrooms that smelled like coffee and broken dreams. I slipped in through the back entrance and found a seat in the last row, baseball cap pulled low, looking like any other stressed-out parent trying to figure out how to not screw up their kids. Stanley took the stage first, looking every inch the distinguished family law expert in his expensive suit and practiced smile. He talked about maintaining stability during family transitions and protecting children from parental conflict, with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of being a professional hypocrite. Then Brielle joined him, and I had to admit she looked good up there, polished, articulate, like the kind of mother every PDA would want as president. She spoke about recognizing signs of emotional instability in co-parents and documenting concerning behaviors for legal protection. The audience was eating it up, taking notes, nodding along, probably thinking these two were the gold standard of civilized divorce proceedings. If only they knew they were getting advice from people who thought hidden cameras and psychological manipulation were legitimate parenting strategies. When they finished their presentation and opened the floor for questions, I stood up slowly, pulling the flash drive from my pocket. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I have a question about documentation." Stanley squinted toward the back of the room, probably wondering why my voice sounded familiar. Brielle's smile faltered just slightly when she realized who was standing in her audience. "I was wondering," I continued, walking toward the front of the room while pulling out my laptop, "if you could share some examples of the documentation techniques you've been discussing, because I happen to have some excellent samples of your work." The room went quiet as I connected my laptop to their projector system. Security started moving toward me, but I was faster. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced as the first video began playing on the big screen behind Stanley and Brielle, "I'd like to show you what modern co-parenting really looks like when there are no cameras, except for the ones they installed without your knowledge." The footage rolled, Brielle calling me a ticking time bomb, Margot planning my psychological breakdown, Stanley discussing custody strategies like a military operation. The audience watched in stunned silence as their parenting experts revealed themselves to be the kind of people who would spy on their own family members. Stanley tried to cut the power. Brielle attempted damage control by grabbing the microphone. But the videos kept playing, one after another, painting a picture of deception and manipulation that would have made Machiavelli proud. "This is what emotional stability looks like," I said as the spray paint footage played, showing Margot vandalizing my car at 2 a.m. "This is how you protect children from conflict." People started pulling out their phones, recording everything. Social media was about to get very interesting for the Sterling family. When the last video finished, the ballroom was dead silent except for the sound of Stanley and Brielle's reputations crashing and burning in real time. "Any other questions about documentation?" I asked the audience. Security finally reached me, but the damage was done. Justice doesn't always come with handcuffs and courtrooms. Sometimes it comes with public humiliation and viral videos that make sure everyone knows exactly who you really are underneath your professional facade. As they escorted me out, I could hear the audience erupting in discussion behind me. Stanley and Brielle's parenting workshop had just become a masterclass in how not to destroy your family. Mission accomplished. You know that feeling when you think you've won the lottery, but then you realize you're actually in the middle of a horror movie and the real monster hasn't even shown up yet? Yeah, that was my Tuesday afternoon. After the public humiliation at the conference, I thought the worst was behind us. Stanley and Brielle had been exposed, their reputations were in shambles, and social media was having a field day with hashtags like #SpyCamFamily and #PsychoInlaws. I was actually feeling pretty good about myself, sitting in my kitchen with a beer and scrolling through the viral videos of my impromptu presentation, when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Williams," the voice said when I answered. It was electronically distorted, like something out of a bad thriller movie. You think you've won, don't you? Who is this? I asked, but I already felt that familiar ice-cold dread creeping up my spine. The line went dead. Then my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. The message was only 3 seconds long, but it was enough to stop my heart completely. It was Micah's voice, small and scared. It's him. Then silence. I called Micah's school so fast I probably broke some kind of dialing record. He was there, safe in his classroom, probably working on multiplication tables and wondering why his dad sounded like he was having a panic attack over the phone. Can you put him in the office until I get there? I asked the secretary, trying not to sound like a complete lunatic. There's been a family emergency. 20 minutes later, I was holding my son tight enough to probably crack his ribs, checking him over like he'd been in a car accident instead of just sitting through a perfectly normal day of 3rd grade. Dad, you're being weird, Micah said, but he hugged me back anyway. What's wrong? Nothing, buddy. Just missed you today. I wasn't about to tell my 8-year-old that someone had somehow recorded him saying something that sounded like a confession or accusation. The kid had been through enough psychological warfare for one lifetime. That night, after Micah was asleep and I'd checked his room about 17 times, I decided to investigate his tablet. Call it paranoia, call it parental instinct, but something about that voicemail felt too convenient, too perfectly timed to be random. I found it buried in his apps, a program running in the background that I'd never seen before. The icon looked innocent enough, just a cartoon microphone. But when I opened it, my blood turned to ice water. Someone had been using my son's tablet to record conversations, to monitor his location, to listen in on our private family moments. The app was sophisticated, designed to look like a game, while secretly transmitting audio files to an external server. I called Giselle immediately, even though it was past midnight. They've been using Micah's tablet to spy on us, I said without preamble. Someone installed recording software and has been listening to everything we say in our own house. Jason, I need you to bring that tablet to the police first thing in the morning. Don't delete anything. Don't try to trace the signal yourself. This is evidence of multiple felonies involving a minor. The police tech team worked faster than I'd ever seen government employees move. Within hours, they'd traced the signal from Micah's tablet to the same apartment that Elena Marsh, aka Talia Winslow, had been renting downtown. But when they raided the place, what they found was worse than just surveillance equipment. Detective Park called me from the scene. Mr. Williams, you need to know what we're dealing with here. This isn't just stalking. This is a full-scale intelligence operation. The apartment was wall-to-wall surveillance equipment, monitors showing live feeds from cameras I didn't even know existed, filing cabinets full of photographs documenting every aspect of my life, and a computer setup that looked like it belonged in a government facility. There were photos of me grocery shopping, picking up Micah from school, having coffee with friends. Pictures of our house taken from every angle, floor plans that showed the location of every room, and what looked like a detailed psychological profile that analyzed my behavior patterns like I was a lab rat. But the most chilling discovery was a wall covered with photos of Micah, at school, at the playground, walking to the bus stop. Someone had been documenting my son's daily routine with the kind of precision that suggested they were planning something far worse than just custody manipulation. Talia Winslow was arrested that afternoon. Stanley was next, then Darren, both charged with conspiracy and multiple counts of stalking and invasion of privacy. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing payments to private investigators, email trails discussing the Jason problem, and enough surveillance footage to fill a small movie theater. But Brielle? She disappeared. Her clothes were gone, her car was missing, and her credit cards hadn't been used since the morning after the conference disaster. It was like she'd vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a note on our kitchen counter. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Too little, too late, but at least I finally had the house to myself. Well, myself and Micah, who was going to need therapy, but was safe and sound and finally sleeping through the night without mysterious recording devices monitoring his dreams. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I was learning the hard way, in my family's world, peace was always temporal. You know what they say about happy endings? Sometimes they're more like happy pauses between the crazy chapters of your life. 6 months after the surveillance nightmare ended, Micah and I had settled into our new normal in a little lakeside town about 3 hours from our old life. The kind of place where the biggest scandal was Mrs. Henderson's aggressive lawn gnome collection and the local diner served pie that could solve most of life's problems. Micah was thriving like a plant that had finally gotten the right amount of sunlight. No more nervous glances over his shoulder. No more questions about whether Daddy was a bad man. No more walking on eggshells around adults who should have been protecting him instead of using him as ammunition. He'd made friends with the kid next door who collected rocks and believed that every creek contained magical fish. And honestly, after everything we'd been through, a little magic seemed like exactly what we needed. I'd found work teaching online business classes for a community college, which meant I could work from home and be available for every scraped knee, homework crisis, and urgent discussion about whether dinosaurs would have made good pets. The pay wasn't great, but it covered our modest rent and left enough for the occasional pizza night, and way too many trips to the hardware store for my new hobby of growing vegetables that actually survived to harvest. Our little rental house had a garden that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that sometimes a man needs to dig in the dirt and grow something good after spending months watching his life get torn apart by people with too much money and not enough conscience. I'd become the proud parent of tomatoes that actually tasted like tomatoes, and Micah had claimed ownership of a pumpkin patch that he was convinced would produce jack-o'-lanterns the size of small cars. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could sleep through the night without checking the locks 3 times or scanning the room for hidden cameras. Micah had stopped that nervous habit of looking around before he spoke, and our evening conversations had returned to normal kid topics like why homework was invented by evil people and whether we could get a dog that would help with garden security. But here's the thing about surviving psychological warfare. It changes you in ways that don't just go away when the threat disappears. I still found myself checking caller ID obsessively, still got nervous when I saw unfamiliar cars parked on our street for too long, still had moments where I wondered if the peace was real or just another setup for the next round of crazy. And then, on a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning while Micah was at school and I was grading papers that proved college students still couldn't figure out the difference between your and your, a package arrived. No return address, no delivery confirmation, just a small brown envelope sitting on my porch like it had materialized out of thin air. Inside was a single photograph of our new house, taken from across the lake with a telephoto lens that had captured every detail of our morning routine. The angle showed our kitchen window where Micah and I ate breakfast, the garden where we'd spent weekends building our new life, and the dock where we fed the ducks that had become our unofficial pets. On the back, in that same generic font that had haunted my nightmares for months, was a message that made my hands shake. You won the game, but the board is still open. I stared at that photo for a long time, feeling that familiar ice-cold dread creeping back into my chest. Someone knew where we lived. Someone had been watching us, documenting our new life with the same methodical precision that had nearly destroyed our old one. I drove straight to the local police station and handed over the photo, explaining the whole insane story to a sheriff who looked like he'd rather be dealing with drunk tourists and parking violations. He took notes, filed a report, and promised to increase patrols in our area, but I could see in his eyes that he thought this was probably just some ex-spouse drama that would blow over. That night, I burned the envelope in our fireplace and held Micah a little tighter during our bedtime story routine. He didn't ask why I kept checking the windows or why I'd suddenly decided we needed better curtains, and I was grateful for his 8-year-old ability to adapt to his dad's occasional weirdness without asking too many questions. Because here's what I'd learned about monsters: they don't always announce themselves with dramatic music and obvious evil plans. Sometimes they smile with familiar faces and share your last name. Sometimes they hide behind legal documents and family dinners and concern for your well-being. And sometimes they're patient enough to wait until you think you're safe before they remind you that the game is never really over. But you know what? I was ready for them this time. Let them come.